Audrey, I'm going to play you a video. It's about 20 minutes long. It's an interview I had with John Rees, who's in Counterfire, and also is one of the people behind the People's Assembly and the demonstration on the 5th of November. I'm not saying he is speaking on behalf of People's Assembly. I want to make that clear. He's just one member of People's Assembly. And I interviewed him a couple of days ago because he is saying that we should vote for Keir Starmer's Labour. Now, I've asked you to come on because I don't think there's anyone more prominent in speaking against Keir Starmer as you. I mean, you've been viewed hundreds of thousands of times criticising him. I'd just like to hear what you think.
Millions.
Millions, sorry, millions of times critiquing him to his face. I'm just wondering what your view is on what John Rees has to say. So I'm just going to play the video of John Rees. Hi, John. Thanks for coming on. I'm sorry you can't make it on Sunday, but you know it's a bit busy and everyone's got busy lives. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about was what's happened since Liz Truss has resigned. Is lots of people are talking about we should have a general election or not. The thing that I saw on this post that I saw on Facebook caught my eye was this People's Assembly demonstration on the 5th of November. Truss is out, time to bring down the government, all out on the streets, general election now. And you've put in your post, you put anyone who tells you they are in the Labour movement but who isn't building this protest is an utter sectarian. I wasn't particularly happy about that because I thought I'm not going on that demo, and I don't regard myself as a sectarian. But you know why? Yeah, well, I'll just say why I don't want to go on that demo. I've had a political education. I joined the Labour Party naively, now I would think naively, in 2010, hoping to do it from inside. Jeremy Corbyn got elected to be leader. I was really happy with that. We were going to transform the party. You were on some of those shows we put on, the JC for PM shows. We had thousands of people coming to those. People were so energetic and excited. The spirit was, we've got something here, we can change things, hopes in us. Jeremy can lead the way. Jeremy's campaign sort of stopped a little bit in 2016, I think, 2017, and sort of thought he can get to be prime minister without doing much at all, and he wasn't pushing it out any further. I was a bit fed up with that, but then we've just seen bureaucracy from the Labour bureaucracy taking over and pushing people like me out of the party, and not a small number of people. We're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in the sense of people leaving the party, but lots and lots of people being victimized, smeared, called anti-Semites, just treated in the worst possible way. To go out on a demo which is saying Tories out, and we know that that means Starmer in, the idea is just not, I'm just not going to do it. But what I'm trying to say is I've had an education. I'm now not as naive. I don't believe the Labour Party can change things. I don't believe that. I think lots of other people think that as well. I don't think they're being, I think they've had an education, and isn't that what we need? Don't we all need to have that education? But then to say to them you're being an utter sectarian is a bit of a low punch to me. That's what I'd say. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, look, I don't disagree with 90% of what you said, and I think that on the left in Britain, when you experience the Labour Party, you're not the first. This isn't the first generation to have had that education, and you know, you might argue, and I think it would be a sustainable argument, might not even be correct at the end of the day, but it's a believable argument, that Starmer isn't the worst we've had. I mean, those of us who lived through Neil Kinnock selling the miners down the Swanee during the miners' strike, you know, that was a pretty bitter pill to swallow. And you could argue, for all the very serious consequences that Starmer's had for the left and the Labour Party, the consequences of Kinnock's betrayal has lasted decades and was society-wide. So, look, I appreciate you know, the experience that you've had, and I don't at all want to diminish the kind of sense of anger that people have with Starmer. I absolutely share that. But here's my thing about the Labour Party. I've never been in it. I kind of, you know, my political education was different, and I kind of got the idea theoretically that the Labour Party wasn't going to be a vehicle for change very early on as a teenager. So I never joined, and I've always been a revolutionary socialist. But my take on Labour is this: I expect the leadership to be appalling. I expect Labour leaders to sell out the class struggle. That's kind of my analysis of what they do, and Corbyn has been the only exception to that experience, and ultimately he was defeated by people who were prepared to do precisely that. So I understand that part of it. But when it comes to elections, I never decide who to vote for on the basis of the policy of the Labour Party or on the nature of the leader, because they're always hostile to the left, and the policy is usually absolutely dreadful in the main. I decided on different grounds. I decided on the basis of what kind of party are we dealing with here, in contrast to other parties. Now, Britain's basically still, or at least in England, a two-party system. The Tories, we'll all agree about this, are the unalloyed, open representatives of the ruling class. That's what that party does. It has no other function in life but to do that. And that's reflected in its policy, its leadership, everything about it. The Labour Party isn't the open representative of the ruling class in this country. It was founded by the trade unions. It's still financed by the trade unions. A majority of its activists are working class people. A majority of its voters are working class people. So it's a different type of party. So Britain has two parties which are, in the way they're constructed, not the same. This isn't always the case. America has two ruling class parties, neither of which were founded by the Labour movement. There is no Labour Party in the United States, and that permeates all the way through the political culture. In Britain, there's a debate about whether the Labour Party should be socialist. There's no debate, serious debate, about whether the Democrats should be socialist. Nobody believes they are. So that space, having a Labour movement-based party, moves the political spectrum to the left in this country compared to countries where no Labour Party exists. And my argument about voting Labour is not the effect that it has on policy, not the effect that it has on the future government. My argument is, what effect does it have on the millions of people, working class people in the main, who vote for it, and the hundreds of thousands of Labour activists? And I know, and you know, that no matter how rotten the Labour Party is, on the day that the Tories are defeated, those people on the ground, holding trade unions together, holding campaigns together, are happier than they would be if the Tories are re-elected. Because we all know what happens after the Tories are elected. Every media commentator and lots of people on the left go, oh, look, the British workers, they're hopeless. They just vote for the class enemy. And everybody knows the distinction between those two things. Now, it leaves all the work to do. I agree with you about that. I don't trust Labour. I can see absolutely that Starmer is the worst witch-hunting leader there's ever been. I know that the fight will have to continue after Labour's elected, but the mood of the people who have to continue that fight will be better if the Tories are defeated.
Well, that's yeah. Well, I mean, I question the idea that Labour's founded on trade unions and the working class and is still in any way the same. I mean, so many of the finances of the party have changed completely. They are relying on private donations, as Blair was as well.
Not when it comes to an election, Crispin. If you look at who actually supplies the money during the election campaign, it's still, they couldn't do it without the union. They couldn't do it without the union call banks, without the activists on the ground. That's the nature of it. It just couldn't happen.
I mean, the unions, though, the unions themselves have been, their power has eroded considerably since the Labour Party was founded, and they're run by people who are often not on the ground.
Well, hang on.
You get people who are at the top of unions who've never been active in the union. They're kind of managerial people.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But to be honest, that's not particularly new, and it's not. I mean,
doesn't that make it a bourgeois? Doesn't that make it kind of bourgeois entity?
You have to be a bit careful with the history. So it is true that the unions are now weaker than they were at the peak of their power in the 1970s. It is not true that the unions are weaker now than they were after the defeat of the general strike in 1926, or that the Labour Party is in a worse place than it was when Ramsay MacDonald went into a national government with the Tories. I mean, Starmer, you can say as bad things as you like about Starmer, and I'll agree with you, but he hasn't yet gone into a national government with the Tories. So you just a little bit careful with reading back.
Well, but we'll move on a bit from that, but I just wanted to make that's my feeling, why I would not particularly be keen on the idea of thinking Labour is a working class party, is because I see what John Donne calls the pointy-shoed, shiny suit people. I mean, they are dominating the Labour Party. We don't have, it's not beer and sandwiches in number 10. It's kind of wine and nibbles, if you get what I mean. It's a different Labour Party now to how it was in the 70s. When I think of the 70s and the unions coming in to meet Harold Wilson or Callaghan or whatever, it was a totally different scenario. You wouldn't have Starmer meeting those kind of people, would he?
No, but to be honest, the old traditional Labour right wing were and still are vicious pigs. So I mean, all right, shiny suit, pointy shoes, maybe, but compared to Ernest Bevin, that's about as bad as it got. Or people in the unions like Frank Chappell, who actually scabbed and broke the print unions in his own industry. So there's plenty of bad characters in Labour's in Labour's.
But you must say that. All right, well, let's just about Starmer. I mean, he's definitely in favour of making cuts. He doesn't see the economy in any way other than as a neoliberal.
Keir Starmer's as bad as you like, but he's not unique in the history of the Labour Party. First, that's just a fact. He just isn't. He just hasn't gone in to a national government with the Tories like Ramsay MacDonald. That hasn't happened. It might happen. He might be that bad, but it hasn't happened. And Ramsay MacDonald was at least as bad. So there's plenty of bad examples from the history of the Labour Party. First off, but second, I'm not concerned with what Keir Starmer's policy or personal stance is. I agree with you. He's as bad as it gets. My point is this: what is the effect of not getting the Tories out on the shop steward in your local workplace, in the person holding together the food bank, in the mind of the person who's organising a protest against the cuts? And what I say is they are more demoralised and fed up if the Tories are returned with a majority than they are if they're beaten. That is just a simple sociological fact. You might think they're living in a dream world, but sometimes.
Okay. So let me just go through that one. So that Starmer wins. These people you've identified, they feel, oh, thank God we got rid of those Tories. The Tories about this guy's in. He comes down number 10, he's smiling, and then what? 2 weeks later, he says, we can't really make any changes because the economy's crashed. We're in a really bad situation. So what you're talking about is a 2-week pill that they get that helps them out for 2 weeks. And then they start thinking, geez, we've got this guy, he's no different. That's more depressing. That's like now we've had two parties both of them can't help us. And then the other thing is, Starmer, because I do need to bring this in, Starmer is a real authoritarian. He is someone who is ruthless. You still talk about those people like Bevin and Frank Chappell. I mean, he is similarly, he will destroy anyone who gets in his way. He's pro-police powers. He's voted for the spy cops. Any kind of mobilization against him will come up against this police state that would be even harder to break than it is now. So when we're talking about mobilizing people against Starmer, that would be a difficult thing to do.
Well, hang on, Crispin. If the Tories get back in, there aren't many differences between Labour and Tory at a policy level. I agree with you. But here's one, and it's not an unimportant one. I don't believe that if Labour get in, it will repeal any of the Tory anti-union laws. That's the history. But I don't think it'll pass the new one that the Tories have got on the stocks for this Parliament. And if they're kicked out, I don't believe that will see the light of day. So in one very important sense, we'll have a bit more freedom to organise than we might not otherwise. But even if that weren't true, I don't think that we can kind of move from where we are now in the sort of consciousness and organisation of the British working class to a wholesale destruction of the system without people moving through a phase where they have to battle with a Labour government. I think a Labour government is going to be the plan B for the ruling class. There's going to be one at some point. It's going to be used to try and control workers. I'd rather that we defeated the Tories now, went into battle against the next Labour government with that defeat in our back pocket, and that will be a stronger place than having to get rid of the Tories at some point in the way. I mean, what's the route to power? What otherwise the route to power? Simply an insurrection against this Tory government. Because if we aren't having a general election, there's only two ways you can change the government. It's either a general election or an insurrection. So what are we going to do? We either say, okay, we won't have a general election because we don't want Starmer, or say, okay, we'll wait for an insurrection. Of these possibilities, of these availabilities, I would say the more likely and in the long term, the necessary thing is to get rid of the Tories and fight a Labour government.
Now, yeah, well, can we talk about something which I think is important? Is what do you think happened with Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, did you think Labour could not be changed? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn's project is bound to fail?
Yeah, that's the big.
Would it not have been a good idea to get everyone into Labour? I mean, you didn't join the Labour Party.
Because otherwise, I'd be as demoralised as you are, and I'm not. So the view that we took was this. And I mean my organisation, Counterfire, and I think other people on the revolutionary left took this view as well. We said, look, we understand that the Corbyn movement is an unprecedented movement. Huge numbers of people pouring into the Labour Party, largely actually from social movements that we'd all been involved in, Stop the War,
exactly.
and the austerity.
Exactly, because I mean, sorry, just to say, Stop the War had a massive amount of people from there going into the German campaign, and People's Assembly, and I
campaigned, as you said, with you to get Jeremy to be leader and for him to. And what I always said all the way through that time, it's all written down so you can check. I'm not making it up.
Yeah, I'm not trying to catch you out.
I want Jeremy Corbyn to get as far and to be as radical as he can possibly be, and I recognise this is an unprecedented political moment, and I'm going to throw my weight into trying to help to make that happen, even though I'm personally not going to join the Labour Party, because I think at some point the right wing will do him in, because that's the nature of Labourism. So my line was always this: I will assist as far as I possibly can. And I would have preferred that rather than the right wing doing Jeremy in opposition, I'd prefer that he'd won a general election, that we'd got a Corbyn government, and that we'd had to deal with it at that point, or maybe in the second term of a Corbyn government, at some point the state and the right wing would have mobilised against Jeremy Corbyn. So I always thought that was likely to happen. I wanted to be as supportive as I possibly could without taking an organisation into the Labour Party and going through all the sort of, and it was absolutely clear that because the Corbyn revolution, if you like, was bigger than any previous internal Labour Party revolution, reaction and revolution are dialectically related. The bigger the revolution, the bigger the reaction. It was obvious that when the right wing got back in control, they would never let that happen again. They would go absolutely insane about driving every last vestige of Corbynism out of the party. And lots of people didn't think that Starmer would go this far. I always thought he would. Really, to go after Sam Tarry, to go after Emma Dent Code, it's outrageous. You're absolutely right about that. And I share people's, almost sort of shocked disbelief that it'll go this far. But that doesn't bring me to the point where I don't want to see the Tories defeated. I do want to see the Tories defeated.
Okay, well, but I want to go to this point here because I think this is important. You're suggesting that when Starmer comes in, so let's go through the scenario, he's in power. What happens then?
And we're going to have a massive fight. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
How is that going to be expressed? In what kind of ways? On the protest? What else?
Yeah, well, you can already see that building, can't you? There's a unique combination, well, not unique, but there's a long delayed, let's put it that way, combination now of strike action, street protest, and forms of direct action taking place in this society. And our job is, it seems to me, to get rid of the Tories and then to sustain that movement so that it takes on a Labour government which will come forward, I think you're absolutely right, with exactly the same form of austerity. So, and one of the things I would say about this Starmer Labour government is, that's what we get, is that it's in a weaker position than many Labour governments in the past. Many of those Labour governments came to power with a degree of goodwill from the trade union movement and ordinary working people, and even from sections of the left. Starmer has shot that goodwill even before he gets near winning an election. So I think there's a very significant weakness in what Starmer's done when he comes to power. He doesn't have the leverage, he doesn't have the goodwill that previous Labour movement leaders had when they got into office.
I think that's that's true, and the economy will be in a bad way. The only fear, you see, the other thing is when you say general election now. I wanted to show you another poll. You don't need to see the poll, but the poll was 50% for Labour, massive majority, Tories under 100 MPs. With that number of MPs and the majority like that, and if you look at them, they're not Emma Dent Codes, they're not Sam Tarrys, they're not anyone who would argue with him. He's cleaned out most of the critical voices. It would be an authoritarian Labour Party in government, wouldn't it? I mean, that's not the same as a minority government or a Labour government with a small majority, but a massive majority Labour government. That terrifies me. When you think about what he's done to all the members, and the way his unscrupulous ways of doing stuff, what could he do to people who are protesting? I mean, he might take on those Tory measures where you put everyone's got things around their ankles, so you wouldn't be able to leave the house without someone knowing where you're going and all that stuff. I mean, he could become a real tyrant. I mean, he might be supposedly left.
No, he might do that. That's true. On the other hand, we are absolutely certain. So that's a certainty that the Tories will do it against a might that Starmer would do it. But yes, he might. Yes, he might. But I keep returning to this. I don't want to argue with you. In fact, I've got no argument with you about how bad Starmer is at a policy level. My argument is about the effect of defeating the Tories on the people stood next to me on the picket line or on the demonstration. And I think, and every Labour victory in the past bears this out, they are in a better mood and more confident and more willing to listen to arguments that we should fight on than they are if the Tories come back in. Because when the Tories come back in, the argument will be unstoppable. And you know what this will feel like the next day. Everybody will say, oh, the workers in Britain, they're all Tory voters. The Tories, the blue wall, the red wall's gone blue. You know, it will demoralise people much more severely if the Tories get in than even the worst Labour government. So I always have the view that because of that effect, the best Tory government is worse than the worst Labour government. Not because of the policy, but because of the effect on the morale of the people who hold the Labour movement together at the base.
Right, well, there you go. Audrey, I've just unmute you now. Thank you for listening to that long interview. What's your view on what John said about Labour being the party of the working class to start with?
Well, I hate to tell you, Crispin, but I've got an awful lot to say on this. And thank you for inviting me on to say it. And I just want to first say that I admire John because I've worked with John Rees in the Stop the War, on the National Committee of the Stop the War organisation during those years of building that organisation. And so I admire him for that, for the work he's done there and working with him. But I think he's really excluded there a few things. The fact is that there's never been an economic and world crisis of the environment like exists today. That's number one. The crisis now is absolutely at a level never been seen before. We don't have the luxury. We do not have the luxury of waiting for, let's get Starmer in, and the argument will be, let's give them, they can't solve all the problems that the Tories created in a short period of time. Let's give them a number of years to change, for radical change, and all the rest of it. I feel like I've been on a merry-go-round all my life with the same argument that John's just put across. I know he's got no illusions in Starmer, but he hasn't actually had, because he comes from a different perspective, he hasn't actually experienced, and a lot of us have, the absolute vicious criminality of this party. To argue that or even as if it's seen as an arm of the working class, a party of the working class any longer, is being destroyed with the destruction of the Red Wall, with the fact that a lot of the unions want to disaffiliate from it, where the absolute betrayal that people have experienced over the last number of years. You've got to look at it in the context of how would it work if the left started to try to explain to workers, we've been knocking on doors telling people to vote Labour when it was Corbyn. So how do we turn around, knock on doors and tell people to vote for this criminal, not just Starmer, his party, because they're all going along with it. They're all silenced by him. They won't even speak out, against Rishi Sunak and all the rest of it, or against war, NATO and so on. So this whole silence, and it's never been a wholesale betrayal like we've had now. We've had it to certain degrees. I've lived through it. I was on the picket line with the miners. I don't know what world John is in, because if we were to go along and try to explain to people as a tactic, let's get Starmer in, all that does is build more and more disillusionment, and the working class can't bear anymore. We had our hopes lifted, and how do you build hope? Hope is the most dangerous thing for the establishment. And we can't afford to dash the hopes and aspirations of the working class again. We've got to give some leadership. The left has got to give some leadership, informed by the experiences we've lived through all our lives, but particularly within the last 5 years. And if we don't do that, we're betraying the working class. What we have to explain to the working class, and a lot of them don't need it explaining, by the way, is that the tactics of Labour today are in the interest of the ruling class. You know, the idea that the incarnation of the Labour Party as it is today is anything but, you know, a party of the ruling class. Everyone can see it. Nobody's looking at Labour and saying, oh, you know, they're on our side. Because otherwise people would be flocking again to the Labour Party like they did with Corbyn. In fact, the opposite has happened. And it's dangerous, really dangerous for British democracy to keep stoking the illusion that the Labour Party represents working class people in any way. It creates disillusionment and despair, and it creates a massive vacuum for the right. Because if we're not saying things clearly, if we're not, to say you're not interested in policies, to say the big ideas are what are important. And you know what? It won't matter who's putting forward those policies, whether it's an independent or whether it's a Labour Party MP at the moment who, all right, being gagged, but speaking out on policies. You'd go and vote on the policies. Policies, 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 not tactics. The game's up. The Labour Party's exposed for what it does. And the idea that the working class is a homogenous group of people. There's so many different layers within the working class, isn't there? There's all of us, you know, hundreds of thousands who joined the Labour Party, who, you know, who fought and had this awful experience and a bit more informed about the nature of Labour. Then there's all those who've stood by on the sidelines. You talk to a girl on a till and ask her what you think, what's gone on. And they have a different opinion altogether. Or, you know, on the bus driver and so on. And at the end of the day, unless you're very clear on the radical changes that are needed, the radical platform that we need to support, people who have a platform of ideas are the people you get behind. And I just think that, I think John has forgotten too, how difficult it was to stop the war, actually stop the war. And why? Because it was Labour. People didn't want to upset Labour. The right wing of Labour would have been against the war if the Tories had been trying to go to war. So, you know, the whole point is that when it's Labour doing things, there will be elements of the working class, and particularly the right wing of the Labour Party, will be putting this facade. Oh, it's necessary to do that. It's necessary to betray the working class and all the rest of it, because we couldn't stop. I'm 100% certain if that it had been the Tories trying to go to that illegal war in Iraq, we would have stopped it. There would have been it was a massive force as it was, but the right wing of the Labour Party gave cover. And so did the establishment, so did the press. If it had been the Tories, we would have stopped them. The force would have been so big, because always people have this idea, oh, well, it's the working in our interest, the working, you know, it's a working class party. And I just think the sooner we say this charade is over and explain to people, it's a charade. We saw it with Corbyn, we saw the forces. I'm going to finish now because I know I've gone on a bit. And we start building a genuine left-wing alternative outside the Labour Party. And it can include a lot. I mean, the Socialist Labour Party, the Socialist group of MPs, they have got a tremendous burden on their shoulders. But how free would they be? How wonderful would it be? What a dream it would be if they would break now, before they're swept along with the dirty association of Starmer and his like. How wonderful would that be? An independent standing, and particularly if the unions could get behind a political party, including all of these groups, and move forward. And until we do that, we don't resort to the desperate measure of getting behind Starmer. I'm sorry.